How many of you remember the song, "Let's Get Physical"? "Let's Get Physical" was by who? Olivia Newton-John. Do you remember the lyrics? Let's get physical. Let's get physical. Let me hear your... Let's just stop there, shall we? If you want something reasonably entertaining, go back on YouTube and watch the video to "Let's Get Physical" by Olivia Newton-John. In its day, it was banned by several countries and by several cities in the United States because of its suggestive and racy nature. We might, as Christians, reflect on this and realize that the title of the song is not "Let's Get Spiritual." It's not "Let's Get Emotional." It's not "Let's Get Intellectual." I'm sure those would all be number one hits any artist could pick up and instantly rise to the top of the secular culture. But it was "Let's Get Physical," and it had a reaction in the day. And honestly, I thought about showing the video at this service, and I thought, no, that's a bad idea. Actually, the Lord told me that's a really bad idea. But it's interesting how morality has changed, and I think you can make an argument it's for the worst. And that, when we talk about relationships, the thing that I'm always amazed by the world out there, the world in which we live, we are looking for love. We want love. We want to be loved. We do. And yet, we are so blind as to how to find it. And the search for love is probably, if you were to make a list of all the things that you will spend your life wondering about or working for, that's it. I imagine for all of us, it's number one. Fame goes away, money, status, all those things that tend to be contenders for us in all the wrong ways. Those don't measure up to love at all. And that's something we, sort of intrinsically, because we're made in the image of God, we know. But how to find that love and how to love well is a challenge to us because we're sinful and we're broken. If you want to today, before you go home to church, or go home from church, before you leave, just start your car, turn on on a day like today, you could roll the windows down. Don't need the air conditioning. But remember that thing that's in your car called the radio that we don't listen to anymore? It has radio stations and things like that, numbers, 93 point whatever. Just scan to one and stay there. Make sure it's not KSBJ, but then just listen to it. Country music, rock and roll, rap, it doesn't matter. The song will probably be about relationships. It'll probably be about love in some way, and we'll have something horrible to say because we really don't know how to love well and how to love at all. The Song of Solomon is a love story. It is a love poem. And it's all the things that romantic literature is. It has got physical suggestion in it. It has got passion in it. And as we think about our relationships, they're kind of made of three things. In the sense that our relationships are physical, especially the ones closest to us, but not just in a sexual way, in the sense that our relationships will be physical in the sense just like we gave each other a hug or extend a handshake. As human beings, there has to be something tactile that we touch that happens in our relationships every single day. When I see my daughter or my son, the first thing I do before saying a word is I give them a hug, and it just comes naturally because there's just something about wanting to touch that is part of how we're made. And we don't need to be afraid of that. It's a gift. And like all gifts, it has to be used well, but it also has to, in our sense of our relationships, be measured by the other, because our closest relationships, or in fact all of them, are governed by not only the physical side of what they are, but also the spiritual and the emotional. And when one of those things is out in front, far in front of the others, that's when our relationships sabotage us. And I find most often, just as a pastor going down the practical road of experience, is that it's the physical that people tend to invest in first. And when that gets out in front and when the spiritual and the emotional aren't there, that's when relationships suffer. Because a level of intimacy has been experienced in a powerful way, but the other ways in which we are intimate with another have not been present. You see, when we build a relationship, it's just like Jesus said, in the parable of the foundation. We want to build our foundations on solid rock, not shifting sand. And when we build a relationship on solid rock, what that means in part is that our relationships will have a physical component, sure, Song of Solomon, I understand. But also, they will have an emotional, they'll have a spiritual, they'll have an intellectual. And the challenge for us as followers of Jesus is to let Jesus shape a foundation for our relationships that is all of those things and not one or two of those things at the expense of others. Now, having said all that, that is really easy to say, isn't it? It is really easy to say, and it is difficult to do. I find in today's world, it's sort of like, people come to me and they'll say, just tell me the one thing that I got to do. And the one thing, I'll give that to you. Follow Jesus. That's the one thing. Follow him. Now, the truth of it, following Jesus, or in today's context, building a relationship in a Christian way, is not exactly the most simple thing to do. It requires all sorts of course corrections. It's like driving your car. You get in your car and you drive on the freeway, but you can't just keep it the same direction all the time. You can't keep it the same speed. Other things are going to get in your way and move around you. You're going to have to adapt. There are things that are going to have to shift on the fly, literally. So as we build these relationships, it's not as if everything is just going to move in tandem. We've got to work at this and adjust. And I find too often that, I'll do marital counseling, premarital counseling for couples that want to get married. And I was trying to think of how to say this pastorally, so let's just give it a run. But I try to ask them questions that sort of gauge where they are in their relationship. And so I'll ask them how they met. And, romance. Usually there's a musical underscore that goes to whatever they say. And hearts appear and emojis everywhere. And so they tell me that story, how they met over dinner. We went to a concert, saw them in a classroom, met on campus, all sorts of things, and they're all good. And so I say, well, tell me the things that you like to do. And they'll say, we like to go to the movies, we like to go out to eat, we like to travel. Church is never on the list. No married couple or premarital couple has ever said to me, we love going to church in their top 5. What sinners they are. But then they'll go on. And frequently what I find is sort of maybe the indulgent side of relationships. The things that feel good to us are kind of what have drawn them together. But when I ask questions about sort of the spiritual side, that's where I find there's been some neglect. And so what I'll tell them is this, especially if they're a younger couple. You are looking at a marriage that we want to build for 60 years, 70 years, longer. And this is an unfortunate truth, but as this marriage goes on from year 5 to 10 to decade number 2 to decade number 3 to decade number 4 to decade number 5, one of the unfortunate truths is that both of you, bride and groom, are going to get older and uglier. I just turned 50, and all these Instagram things you see, #fabulous50, what a lie that is. I'll just tell you, comparing 50 to 20, 50 doesn't feel so fabulous. 20 felt awesome. It felt great. But you're going to get older and uglier as it goes on. And so the question is, what is the real part of the foundation that's truly going to undergird the others the most? And the answer is the spiritual side. Ultimately, marriage is a faith-based thing where I believe that it is God's plan for the other person to complete who I can be. And that is entirely about faith. Now, the physical is part of it. The emotional is part of it. The intellectual is part of it. But I think it is so important, especially in our sex-obsessed culture, where it is used to market and sell absolutely everything in a prostitution that is just abhorrent. It is so important for us as the church to realize that this physical side of life is a tremendous gift. It's a gift of God. When Jesus said to Adam and Eve, go forward into the world and multiply, the physical side of life is a blessing that God has given us and is used to fulfill a divine purpose. But to think of that as just the entire foundation for what a relationship is such both a temptation and a sinful mistake. Even Solomon, whose name is attributed to this book, I think if we were to talk to him in heaven today, he would confess. Solomon is not the person we want to look to as far as chaste living. Solomon is not the person we want to look to for relationship advice. Let's remember what his dad did, maybe. Hold that in our heads just for a second. But then also, this was a guy who had a harem. So if you're looking for some example of monogamous, faithful living, this is not your guy, right? I think even he would say, we've got to remember what it is to live this whole life. And nothing is going to influence this side of heaven more than the power of relationships. And when Jesus said that we are to love our neighbor, another way to say the same thing is that we have got to acknowledge that we have to get our love for each other right. And when we love each other well, we will feel a joy that's divine and know God in an incredibly powerful way. But we have got to go about this business with some seriousness in the sense that when we get this right, it is beautiful. But I have seen when a relationship goes wrong, it can do such harm. And to forgive and to move forward and to get back on your feet is truly a painful but necessary and possible journey. But love, relationships, is something we have to get right. The other day we have once a month, we have a pastor's meeting, all the pastors of the church. We come together and we have lunch, and there's no agenda when we usually come together because there's agendas for other meetings, but not for this one. And we just talk, see what's going on, and invariably as things will happen, things come up in the church, things that are going on. And so this last time we got together, Pastor Sylvia, who's a pastor for the Altar and Moja worship service over on the West Campus, it's English-speaking Africans, if you're not familiar with them. And Pastor Sylvia was talking to me over lunch, and she said, hey, Andy, she said, I have a question. I said, sure. She said, would you be willing to teach a short-term Bible study to some members of the Altar Emoja worship service on the West Campus? And I said, Pastor Sylvia, I'd love to. That's awesome. Thank you so much for asking. What does it need to be about? And then she looked at me and she said, I would like for you to teach us about sex. That's what she said, word for word. I remember it very vividly. Do you know how many times I've had a request for a Bible study on this topic in 25 years of ordained ministry? One, and it happened 2 weeks ago. Then she said, I would like for Deborah to take part in that well. And I thought, what a bad idea that is. And so we get to talking, and then I said, hey, if it's something that is needed, I said I'm there, and I'm sure Deborah would love to be there as well. And so what happens is she emails Brenda Kinney, who's the administrative assistant for me and runs my life, and then she very promptly emails Deborah, which means that Deborah has read about her agreement to do this prior to talking to me. Which then means I come home. I open the door. I step in. The first word I hear is, well. I've learned over the years, this is not good. Usually I get, hello, how are you? Hello, how was your day? Hello, I've missed you. Hello, I love you. Sometimes I get, well, not good. So we're talking about it. And anyway, we agreed to do it. Some other things, just so you know, this Bible study kind of takes a different flavor over in the Altar Moja congregation. So I was asking Pastor Sylvia, it's like, what's how much time and so on and so forth. And she said, well, we usually come together, we have food. I said, that sounds great. What's more Methodist than food? Then she said, we usually dance for a little while. I said, what? She goes, we're African. This is what we do. We don't have Bible study without dancing. I said, okay. So we have a little food. We have a little dancing. She said, it won't be more than 3 songs. Okay. And then she said, well, for the rest of the time, just hearing what you and Deborah have to say. But then we got to some serious matters. And this is what she told me. She said, the reason I'd like for you to do this, for you, Deborah, to do this, is because we have some families, she said, that are just under a lot of pressure. She said, we've got a lot of families, especially younger families with young kids. And if you're unfamiliar with the Altar and Moja part of our First Methodist Houston, about half of this congregation, that's about 110 people who worship with us every week, but about half of them are new to Houston, new to America, new to our economy, new to our schools, new to just what it is to function in a society where we would, maybe if we're experienced or been from this country for a while, would just take for granted. And I was just thinking about that. Being married's hard enough, isn't it? I mean, when you get married, there's going to be some days that are not the easiest. There are going to be some great ones. But there's also, if you're in it for the long term, going to be some tough ones. Raising kids, how hard is that, right? These little people take a lot of love. And when you get to know these families, they are in this country, usually from another part of Africa, because they want a better opportunity for their children. That's why they're here. You add to that job insecurity. You add into that kids getting to know schools in a foreign culture. You add to that an exponential of other things, and you begin to see just the pressure that marriages can be under. And if spending a little time in Bible study and praying together helps that, I'm in. But it's necessary, because sometimes it isn't the fact that we have built relationships that don't have the foundation we need, although that happens. Sometimes it's that the reality of life and sin and evil and stress and pressure and sickness and all sorts of other things can just kind of beat up on us to a certain point where all of a sudden the foundation we have has taken some punches. And we've got to straighten it out if we're really going to have the strength we need to make it. So I just throw that out there to say, as the church, as First Methodist Houston, one of the missions that we have to make sure we stay locked on and stay focused about is the building of the strongest relationships we possibly can. Or to say it another way, is we have to be about the business of teaching each other to love well. And the degree to which we do that will strengthen our church, our community, our city, our nation on this world. And all you have to do is look around, and where you see chaos, you probably, beneath the surface of that, have just for whatever reason, relationships that aren't working. Now, it's true that, I think you can err on the other side of things. It's when I've preached on issues like this before, the physical side of a relationship isn't the only place you can go wrong. I think back to the Puritan influence of the United States, and when we were starting out and British settlers were coming over and our colonies were being built, it's like one of the major driving forces of our society at that time was a tremendous Puritan influence. So much so that the physical side of life got almost, not quite, but almost demonized, like it's a source of evil. Like, you better not dance because that's going to lead to sex, which is going to lead to sin, which is going to lead to hell. And that's a little drastic. And we end up dismissing this idea that the physical things in life are a gift which we've been given by God to enjoy. But it is so essential that we get this balanced. But when we do, when a relationship goes right, what can happen is that love prevails. And when a true, biblical, holy, pure love is experienced, you'll know it. You will feel it. It will change you. It will be something that others take notice of. When we love each other and love each other well, it has an unbelievable capacity to be noticed, be felt, and change the world for the better. So I want to challenge you. I challenged you earlier by saying, kind of look for the sin. Listen to the secular music. Watch the advertising that comes in front of you. Easy to do. But what if a second challenge would be to look for an example of love that has gone right. Look for a love that is holy and pure. Look for a love that has the capacity to change each other and change this world, and see if you can find an example of that either within or around you. I want to share one. You may have been following the last few weeks up in Dallas, the trial of with Amber Geiger, police officer, walks in to an apartment after a 13-hour shift, and she walked into the wrong apartment. In the apartment was the owner, whose home it was, Botham Jean, and Amber, thinking that it was her apartment and he was an intruder, pulled out her weapon and shot Botham and killed him. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison. And then, as is custom in the sentencing portion of a hearing, members of Botham Jean's family had the opportunity to not only speak to the court, but speak to her. And Botham had a younger brother named Brant. And so he had an opportunity to get in front of the court and get in front of the woman who murdered his brother and say something. And we have the clip of what he said. Now, as we watch it, it's somewhat controversial. As we watch it, it's a story that is still unfolding. We don't know how it will end. But what I want you to look for are these things, is that love has a physical, emotional, spiritual side, and when those all three work together, it is a love that has tremendous power. And I want to see if you can see some of that as we listen to what Brant said. If we could put the video on the screen, if you would watch with me.
I don't want to say twice or for the 100th time what you've or how much you've taken from us. I think you know that. But I hope you go to God with all the guilt, the bad things you may have done in the past. Each and every one of us may have done something that we're not supposed to do. If you truly are sorry, I know I can speak for myself. I forgive you. And I know if you go to God and ask Him, He will forgive you. And I don't think anyone could say it Again, I'm speaking for myself, not even behalf of my family. But I love you just like anyone else. And I'm not gonna say I hope you rot and die just like my brother did, but I personally want the best for you. And I wasn't gonna ever say this in front of my family or anyone, but I don't even want you to go to jail. I want the best for you. Because I know that's exactly what both of them would want you to do. And the best would be give your life to Christ. I'm not gonna say anything else. I think giving your life to Christ would be the best thing that both of them would want you to do. Again, I love you as a person. And I don't wish anything bad on you. I don't know if this is possible, but can I give her a hug, please? Please?
Yes. I've watched that, I don't know how many dozen times. The judge is in tears. She would end up giving her, Amber, the judge's personal Bible. They would all hug afterwards, beyond what that video shows us. All that to say, and it's been criticized in many fronts, from the judge to the sentence to the process to all of it. It's still a story that's unfolding. What I ask is to say, I think part of what love does is it reaches out and touches us in a way that only God can. And if you listen to the video, you will see Brant, the younger brother, ask the judge to give her a hug, not once, but twice. The first one is sort of polite, like you're talking to a judge. The second one has a little bit more passion. This is something he needs to do. And then they embrace. I don't know what you think your first conversation will be Jesus in heaven will be. I kind of wonder what mine will be. But I wonder if we might see a glimpse of it in a little bit of that. And that there really isn't so much to say. But all Jesus wants to do is to give us a hug, tell us that he loves us, and welcome us home. Pray with me.
Thank you for joining us today. We want you to know, no matter where you are or how you worship with us, you are always part of our church family. We would love to have you join us live downtown at 8:45 or 11 o'clock, or as always, through the broadcast. We would love to hear from you. If you have a question about today's service, if you would like to contact one of our pastors, if we can pray for you in any way, please reach out to us through our church website. Thanks for worshiping with us today. It was great to have you with us.